Alright guys, so welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be looking at a React app whose purpose will be to fetch and display data from the GitHub users API into our browser. Now I'd just like to mention that this will be part of my React series on YouTube, so if you'd like to follow along, remember to subscribe and leave a like so that you're always notified of new uploads. Okay, so we'll need a couple of things first before we get started, and if you haven't installed Node.js, you can head over to nodejs.org, nodejs.org like that, and you can grab the long-term support by clicking this button and installing it. Now once you have installed it, it will install Node.js on your system, and then you can run npm. Just by running that, it should bring something like this, and that will verify that npm is installed. And you can run the version that you have by running npm -- version like that, and you can say I have version 6.14. And then the purpose for that is because it will help us run commands like npm start to start our development server, and npm run npm run build, which will build our application. Okay, now if you have npm a version higher than 5.2, then npx will come bundled together with it, so you won't have to install npx. But if you don't have npx installed, you can just run npm install -g, which will install it globally, and then write npx like that. Executing this command will install npx globally on your system. Okay, but if you have a higher version of npm than 5.2, then it already comes installed with it. Now we'll also need to install create React app, but before I do that, I'd just like to mention that the old way to do this would be to install a create React app globally by saying npm install -g and saying create React app like that. But this version, this way of installing it isn't really recommended these days, and that's why we need npx. And the reason why we need npx, we'll say npx create React app like that, and then the name of our application. The reason why we need npx is because npx always ensures that we're using the latest version of create React app. Okay, so let me just cd into my desktop, and then I'll say npx create React app, and I'm going to call it fetch data, just for the purposes of this tutorial. Now this will take a while to run, so once it's finished, I'm going to be back. Alright guys, so npx create React app has finished running, and you can see the folder it's created right here, and I'm just going to cd into that folder, fetch data, and then I'm going to open Visual Studio Code in that folder. Okay, now let's take a look at the file structure. You can see that one thing I forgot to mention is that create React app will always initialize a Git repository for you in your folder. Okay, so let's take a look at the file structure. You can see the public, we have the favicon for the React icon, we have index.html and the React logos right there, along with the manifest.json file and the robots.txt. This is just for SEO. And then we have a source folder with app.css, app.js, app.test, index.css, index.js, log svg, report web vitals, and setup tests. Now most of these files we won't even use, and in fact I'm going to delete most of them. But before I do that, I just like to run the initial application just so you can see how it renders, and then I'm going to say npm start like that. This will bundle the scripts together and then compile them and open a development server on localhost 3000 like that, and I can close this. And once it does that, it will just open a page with the React icon, and it's taking so longer than I expected. Okay, there you go. So this is the initial application that create React app will render for you. Let me just close this as well. Okay, and I can close this terminal as well. Okay, so I'd like to start deleting files, the files that we won't really need, and one of them is this, and the setup test and the report webs and the logo SVG, and I'm also not going to need the app test and the app CSS, so I can just delete them. And then in the public folder I can delete the favicon, I can delete the logo, these two logos, the manifest JSON and the robots.txt, and only leave the index.html inside. Now when you took a look at the index.html, it just has some simple guides, and of course our application breaks, but we're going to fix that in a minute. If you look, it breaks, it doesn't show anything. And I'd just like to uncomment this and remove this manifest.json link, and then I'd like to change the title to say fetch data from GitHub, just a simple title like that, and then remove this comment as well. Okay, that's just about it for the index.html, and we won't touch it again. And then now we can go to our app.js, and we can, because we deleted these two files, we don't actually need them. And you can see that for the latest version of React, we don't need to import React at the top, so that's actually very nice. And then in the index.js, we can remove this report web vitals because we deleted it as well. And then you can remove this as well. And when I save that, you can see that now our app should render, at least render something. Let me just change this and say, let's return a div saying hello React, like that. Logo is not defined. Okay, there you go, hello React. And let me just place this side by side so that you can see what I'm working on as I'm working on it. And then one thing I should mention is that you can see that I don't have semicolons in my code. Okay, so that's just I just set prettier to remove all semicolons from my code, because JavaScript doesn't really need explicit semicolons. And if you need semicolons, you can just place them. There's no problem with that. There's no problem. It's all about preference. I like it without semicolons for my code. Okay, now one thing that I would like to do, you can see that this is the div that we're returning. Okay, one thing that I'd like to do is actually create a component called GitHub, and I say github.js. Now make sure that if you're naming components, make sure you always start with a capital letter. The reason being that React will always take it to be a component if it's a capital letter, and if it's a small letter, then it will take it to be a HTML element. Okay, we can close the index.js. Now in this file, I'd like to import a few things, but before I do that, if you watch my my intro to VS Code video, I mentioned this extension, the ES7 React Redux. I mentioned this extension, but it really didn't showcase it. So I'd like to show you how it works. Once you get this extension, you can install it, and then because this is a new file, I just like to create a shorthand for it, which will generate some code for me. And I'd like to say I want a functional component like that. You can see it creates this component for me, and I'd like to export it, so I'd like to say RAFC and then export like that, and it export the component as default. So in this GitHub component, there are things that I'd like to get, and we're going to be using useEffect hook. Okay, useState hook first of all, and then useEffect hook from React like that. And then let me just return and say this is the GitHub component like that. Now in order to render this component, I need to go back to my app.js and import the file. So I'm going to go at the top, and I'm going to say import GitHub from /GitHub like that. Another thing to mention is that if you look in my index.js, let me just show you something in my index.js. When you look at index.js, when I'm importing a CSS a JavaScript file from my app.js, for example, when I'm importing a JavaScript file, I just need the name of the file, which is app. But if I'm importing another file from my, for example, index.css, I have to put the index plus the extension. So that's something worth to note in case because it might give you a few errors once in a while when you are starting out with React. Okay, So in order to render my GitHub component, in order to render this in my browser, I need to go back to app.js, import it, and then I'll come into my div right there and I'll say GitHub like that. And once I save that, it should render. This is my GitHub component. If it can load faster like that, this is the GitHub component, and you can see that our component works. Okay, now there are a few things that I'm going to do in my GitHub. First of all, I'd like to set a URL to the GitHub API, which is https://api.github.com/users like that. And let me just console log the URL to see if I'm correct, and you can check the console. Let me place this at the bottom, move this to the top a bit, and move this at the bottom. Really, that's at the bottom. Okay, close that. In my console, you can see, let me just try and go to this site, and you can see this is the array that it's an array of objects. This is what we're going to be fetching and displaying in our browser. So I'm just going to leave this open and just zoom in, because there are a couple of things that we're going to be grabbing, like the login, the ID, the avatar URL, and the HTML URL. For now, that's all I'd like to do. So I can close this and can resize this. Let me just check what this error is saying. Okay, just reload it. Okay, there you go. There you go. Now, there are a few things that I like to do. First of all is I'd like to set up my my state value. So I'll go ahead and say const users and set users. This is just a naming convention, okay? And you can use any naming that you want. So I'm going to say I'm going to get this from useState hook, and it's going to be an empty array for begin, because we are fetching an array, as you can see. So on the first page, it's going to be an empty array. And then I'm going to just set up my useEffect with a callback like that. And I'm going to add an empty dependency array list, just so that it only runs on the initial render. That's the purpose for these two square brackets. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to create the function that will actually fetch this data from this URL, because you'll find that if I log this URL, as you can see, it just logged the URL and it will not return any data. So I'd like to create a function and say const what do you name it, fetch data or fetch users. Let me say fetch users, and I'm going to say it's going to be an arrow function like that. And I'd like to make this asynchronous, asynchronous like that. And then I'd like to, what should be inside here, let me create another variable and say const response like that is equal to await await. We're going to be fetching the URL like that. And then I'd like to create another variable called users like that, users, and users is going to be awaiting response.json like that. So basically what we're doing inside this function is that we are fetching data from the URL, and the data that we get, we're going to be displaying it as a JSON in JSON format. That's what this is saying. And then these users, I like to assign it to this this function right here. So I'm going to say set users, and I'm going to say users like that. Now let me just comment that out, and then I'm going to say I want to console log the users, just so you can see what happens. And if you console log the users, because oops, did that work correctly? Let me return this. Okay, did that work? If you reload, it should return an array of, oh okay, sorry, I have to actually place it inside here. So for the useEffect, I am going to be placing this function inside the useEffect, and this is the only function that we're going to be calling, and I'm going to say fetch users like that. And once I do that and I save, then it should fetch the users for me. You can see it returns an array of 30 objects. You can see that. Let me place this on a bigger screen. Okay, so this is basically the data that we're going to be fetching and we're going to be displaying. And if you see like the login Mojombo right there, you can see the login there, number one, everything is the same as this, but we're just fetching it and we're going to be displaying it much better rather than in this JSON format. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is actually let me think about this for a moment. Resize this. Okay, not so much because I still want this in there, but I can remove this console log for now because we have seen that the function actually works. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is actually work on my return statement. So I'm going to be remove this and say return. Now one thing you'll notice is that if I have a div inside here and say maybe hello React like this, if I want to add another div below it, it will give me an error, you can see, and if I try to save, it will throw a big fat error at me. If you just try and load, you can see failed to compile. The reason why is because the return statement should always return one main element or component for that matter. And there's a reason, there's a way you can do that. You can say return h1 saying hello React like this, and then you can place another div inside the main div, which is this, right, like that, and you can say React is cool like that. And so once you save that, you can see that it actually works. If you just save, you can see hello React is cool right there. Now another way we can do this is if you don't want to use divs, you can use what React calls fragments, and you can do that by just removing this and saying react.fragment like that. And you can see when I save this and try to reload, you can see that it works the same way. Now react.fragment has a shorthand property where you can just remove this and leave the empty angled brackets. This will be interpreted by React as a fragment, and once I save that, you can see that it's still the same. And if I were to add another paragraph here and say lorem 20 for example, you can see that it will generate lorem ipsum for 20 words like that, and it will display. Please forgive me, my system is a bit slow today. Okay, so now what I'd actually like to do in this return is I want to get this data and iterate over the data, which will give me a list. I'm going to be using the map function, the map method, sorry, and it will give me a list, and then the list is what I'm going to be displaying right here. So I can actually close this console, and I'm going to say what I want first is get the users and then map over the users that we've got from here. We're going to be mapping over the users, and then I'm going to say a user, and then for the user I want to destructure this data. Okay, I want to destructure this data. That's why I zoomed in. And there are things I'm going to need. First of all, I'm going to need the ID, and I'm going to explain why, and then I'm going to need the login, and then the avatar URL and the HTML URL like that. So I'm going to say ID, login, avatar URL, and HTML underscore URL like that, and this we'll be getting it from the user. Okay, and once you do that, we want to return, not use reducer. Did I do something wrong? Oh, I used square brackets, so I actually need curly braces like that, and that's much better. Okay, so inside this I like to return a list. Okay, I like to return a list like that, a list. Now what you'll notice, I'm going to leave this purposefully so that you can see that the error that it will throw in the console. Okay, so I'm going to return a list, and I'm going to say inside the list I want a h1, okay, and h2, saying for the h2, since I want the name, I'm going to be grabbing the name from the data that I destructured, which is the login, and you can see the login is the name of the person right there. So I want the h2 to be login, and then I want an image, because the avatar URL is an image. If we look at the data right here, the avatar URL is actually an image. It is actually an image. Is it really? Okay, it's an image. And I'm going to say avatar URL like that. And for the alt, in case the image fails to load, I just like to show the name of the person, which is login. And then I'd like an a tag, because this is a link to their profiles on GitHub. I'd like an a tag, and the href will be html underscore URL, and I'm just going to say GitHub profile like that. And once I save that, notice that it will throw an error, as I have not used ID. It will throw an error in the console. Okay, once I do that, you can see that it actually fetches the data. See that it actually, let me close this first, it actually fetches the data, the name of the person with the picture, and the GitHub profile. If I have to click this, you can see on my bottom left, you can see the root of the link, and if I click open this in a new tab, you can see that it will take me to the GitHub profile of the person. Okay, and you can see it has generated 30 people from our array. Okay, and we're going to style this in a bit, don't worry about it, but I just like to show you the error in the console that it will give me, which says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Okay, and you can fix that by saying, because the map function actually returns a list, I'm going to say I'm going to give it a key prop and say the key should be from the ID. Now remember that this has to be unique, that's why I'm using the ID, because the ID is unique for everyone here. Okay, and once I save that, you'll notice that the error will go away. Okay, if you reload it, the error goes away. Okay, now actually the entire purpose of this video has been met. You can see that we are getting data from the GitHub API and we're displaying the data, but just to make it look a bit better, I'm going to just add some styling to it, and I'm going to show you how to add styling. Now if you look in our app.js, you can see, not our app.js, sorry, but in our index.js, you can see that I'm importing a CSS file called index.css. So in order to style this, I actually need to go to index.css, and then I can remove this because we don't need it. And then I can say for the body, let me add a background color of, let me just choose the color because I don't remember its hex value. Let me place it right about, right about there, with that body background color. And then we can style this using actual HTML elements, actual HTML classes. Now one thing about React, because React uses JSX, we can't use class like this. We can't use class like this and say maybe class of user name. Okay, let me just place it one thing, username. Now if I had to use this as class, styling it actually will work, but in our console it will actually throw an error, because it will say something like, do you mean class? Do you mean class name? Like this. So in JSX we actually use class name instead of class. So remember that when you want to add styling. Okay, so let me just add some stylings here and then say for the h2, because this is only one file, I'm not going to be adding classes, I'm just going to be targeting them individually. And I'm going to say let me say h2 should be, actually let me start by removing these bullets, and I'm going to say for the list items, let me remove the bullets. And then I'm going to say for the images, let them have a width of 50 pixels and a border radius of 50% so that they are circular, like that. And I'm going to say let the list items have a background color of white. And I'm going to say for the body, let me add a margin of 0 on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right, like that. And then for the list items, let me add a border radius of about 10 pixels so that they are rounded at the edges. And then let me add some padding so that the words are not completely at the edges, but they can be pushed inside. And I'm going to say padding of 20 pixels, like that. Oops. let me add some margin on the list items so that they actually push downwards and reduce the padding. And I'm going to say margin of 10 pixels or 20 pixels on the top and bottom and 0 on the left and right, like that. And yeah, this is a good enough styling for this kind of project. And you can see if you want to click the GitHub profile, let me just remove the text decoration, like that. If I were to click these links, it will take me to the individual GitHub profile. Okay, so let me just add some styling for about 992 pixels, and I'm going to say add a media query and say for a min width of 992 pixels. Then let actually, do I need that? I didn't add. I should have displayed this as an added list so that I can actually display it as grid, but I didn't do that, so there's no point of really doing this, is there? Let me try something. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna say display flex. Yeah, it doesn't really work. But the point of the video has been met. You can add your own. You can try and add this into a list, and to do that all you have to do is wrap all of this into a UL tag, wrap it into a UL tag like that, and then you can add this to be a class name of maybe a list, like that. And then you can now style the list and then display it as a grid once it reaches about a width of about 900 pixels and above, to display it as a grid so that it looks much better. And the reason why there's more space on this side than on this side is because I haven't removed the padding for the lists. So you can do that at your own time, or you can just come and say no, you can do that at your own time. Okay. And yeah, I think that's it for this project. A simple project to fetch and display data from an API. A simple project looking very nice. And yeah, so this will be part of my React series. I'm going to be doing some simple project looking at React functions and the useState hooks, React hooks, and all that good stuff. And I'm going to be doing some periodic videos about them, and then I'm going to place them in a playlist. So if you want to follow along, remember to like and subscribe, and ring the bell so that you're always notified of my latest uploads. And I'll see you in the next video, guys.